Albert Lee Seed is proud to support the Back to the Roots podcast. Like you, they value the one-on-one conversations with farmers and other agricultural professionals that you hear on this show. Albert Lee Seed helps organic and transitional farms with a full line of organic and non-GMO farm seed for corn, soybeans, forage and pasture, cover crops, and cereal grains. Check them out at alseed.com. That's alseed.com. We also would like to make listeners aware of the Organic Farming Conference coming up on November 7th and 8th at the Mount Hope Event Center in Mount Hope, Ohio. There is a variety of speakers and great learning opportunities. For more info, please visit organicfarmingconf.com.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, today we are sitting down with Dean McIlvane, who is an organic farmer in Wayne County, Ohio, and Kevin Thomas, the founder and owner of Western Reserve Distillers in Lakewood, Ohio, and really glad to have you guys on. I talked to Dean. He sells organic grain to the organic distillery, so thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to sit down with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mike.
So if we could, I guess I'll start with Dean, because I've met Dean years ago selling crops to the organic farmers in central Ohio. Can you give us a background on where you started with your farm, how many acres you farm, and kind of from when you started farming to present day, just in a quick synopsis?
Okay. I grew up in Worcester as a farm machinery dealer's son. My father invested in farmland and farmed on the side. I grew up at a time when energy crisis was a thing in 1973, and after going to college and trying to solve the problem of diminishing resources and fuel and how our food's produced, I was introduced to the notion of organic food while studying at Grinnell College in Iowa. After a semester in Washington, D.C., trying to affect some change in the organic research movement, I decided the best way to accomplish anything in this area was to just do it myself. I graduated from Grinnell, went into the Peace Corps, hoping to learn more about subsistence farming and ways of farming with fewer inputs, and came home to commence taking over the farm that my father had invested in. It was 1,200 acres located near West Salem. About 850 of it is tillable, and the first thing I did was practice farming conventionally and looking for resources on how to do things organically. We're thin in those days, but by the early 80s I discovered the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, who then broadened my sights on how this might be accomplished, and made the conversion on the farm in 1985. First certified through OFA in 1988, and from there we were off and running. Initially we grew soybeans for Eden Foods, food grade tofu beans. They were a great customer for many years. We branched off into spelt for Purity Foods, and it was a good crop to rotate with. The demand for corn soon grew, and we figured out how to work a rotation that involved not just the corn or the soybeans and spelt, but also small grain or clover and other small grains, leading back to corn, and have been following the path of the marketplace ever since. The demand for food grade grains in those days was huge, and the supply was small. Over time, those markets have shifted, and we became more involved with feed stocks as Organic Valley became involved in our area, and the need for hay and corn especially were needed. And we've tried to adjust to the marketplace, always attempting to grow something that does well on our soils. Recent years, there have been more niche markets pop up, and the distilleries has been one area that have caught my eye, or I've caught their eye. And when Kevin came to me a few years ago, it was sort of a perfect match. I had always wanted to market grains closer to home and contribute to a value-added product. It's not easy carving out a niche, but this one seemed to fit quite well. We have provided corn, some wheat, a little rye. The spelt especially has been a big hit for the taste and flavor and sweetness it offers. And we have worked to recycle the spent grains back through the animals that we have on the farm, and share the product of those efforts with the restaurant that's associated with the distillery, called Distill Table.
That's a really interesting story there, all the way up through how it's interesting to me to see how the food grade small grains market kind of went away, but there was something else there to take its place, and it evolved from tofu to bourbon. And I will pick bourbon every day over tofu. So.
It does heighten your spirits.
Now, with the food grade market going away, was that more of a replacement by larger farms losing the niche market, or was that just there wasn't a demand for what you were producing at that point?
Those buyers in those days were relatively small, and as the market grew, there was new competition came into the food grade market, and as it grew, then there was a demand for bigger producers, lower cost producers. It seems like it's just been a natural evolution, as buyers are always trying to buy things at a lower cost, and they find a supplier somewhere else that can do it more efficiently, either in the Great Plains out west or closer to their locale. I know the Eden Foods, our soybean buyer, they really got squashed by the bigger producers of soy milk.
Mm-hmm. That seems to be the case in, all across the board, trying to find, at 800 acres tillable, you're a small farm, comparatively to some of the Great Plains operations, and always searching for that niche market is something all farmers should be doing at all times, because as soon as there gets to be a price that's high enough, we see this across, the entire organic industry right now. And it just is it's a time shift depending on the commodity when that actually happens. We're seeing it in milk right now, and it'll happen all across the board. So now farmers need to continue to improve practices if they want to hold on to their small farms. So it's kind of neat to see, always looking for those new markets and keeping your eyes open and your opportunities open, and not sticking to a certain corn and bean rotation to lock yourself in and hoping you're going to get by.
So true.
So, Kevin, can you fill us in a little bit on the history of the distillery? And
yeah, so it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I went to my wife and said, okay, I've been working in corporate America now for about 25 years, and it's time for me to make a change. Had a great career, had a wonderful time. Actually, I've been in the food industry pretty much my entire life. We kind of grew up on a farm, believe it or not, and went from farming into basically into running restaurants, and then from running restaurants into a corporate job with Nestle. So I've actually worked for the world's largest food company for about 25 years. And I think one of the things that I saw was that the organization was changing, and I think both the food industry was changing too. And I think as people started to look more for unprocessed foods and started to look more back to, cooking food at home, and a little bit less about the convenience piece, a little bit more about getting back to fresh foods, and you start to see more chilled foods grow in the cabinets and everything too. It was time for me just to make a change. So basically I left Nestle about 18 to 24 months ago, after kind of planning this project for about 4 or 5 years. And I think when we started in the beginning, obviously it's an idea, so you step back and say, okay, what do we see happening in a macro context? Both, what's happening in the food sector, what's happening in kind of the food and beverage space, looking at both restaurants and also looking at the consumer space. And I think we had seen craft beer come from really a space where it was maybe 5 or 6% of the total consumption. It now is probably 25 to 30% of the beer consumption that's out there. And I think pretty much across the country, whether it be California, whether it be Wisconsin, whether it be Ohio, you can find some kind of a craft product that's made within probably within a 1 or 2 mile area of where you're standing. We started to look and wanted to do a project that was kind of on the food and beverage side. Wanted to do something that was local, that could also kind of leverage what Ohio had to offer. And when we started looking at different options, that really distilled spirits for me was one of those things that kind of stood out. You were starting to see some distilleries starting to pop up. Probably the last 15, 20 years, you started to see some craft elements start to happen. There have been some legislation changes that have allowed people to enter in and get into the distilling space. Distilleries are no longer treated like felons, which really up until that point in time you were pretty much still treated as a criminal. Everything was overseen by the ATF at that stage. Once they created Homeland Security and kind of changed it, they created what's called the Tax and Trade Bureau. I think the federal government particularly started looking at craft distilling as a revenue source and something that they did want to kind of develop more of. And we really said, okay, this is interesting. We started taking some classes, started looking at different equipment, started putting together some business models. And I think when we started to look at it from a localization standpoint, organic was important to us. Not really from a health standpoint. It's difficult to say you're making healthy vodka or you're making healthy bourbon. And quite frankly, the federal government, doesn't look on that kindly making those types of claims. But we did want to basically use grains that had no pesticides, that had no herbicides, and also wanted to look for farmers that were local to the area that we could build a sustainable relationship with. And I think Dean has definitely risen up into that corridor. And we did actually worked with him in the very beginning to select some of the grains and try to find also some other grains that would also produce a spirit which kind of has a terroir element or has basically a flavor of place. And I think very much that's the case. I mean, our spirits are unique. Both the vodka, the gin, and the rum are all basically distilled from, actually the rum is the only ingredient which doesn't come from Ohio. But the other ones are all distilled here from Ohio-based grains. We are building bourbon right now, which is actually going into the barrel aging process. That's also made from Ohio grains. And I think it does, using the heirloom seed stock that Dean does grow on his farm does make a huge difference in terms of our flavor. And I think it really has allowed us to kind of come from a relatively small distillery getting up and running. We've actually been able to produce a product which I would say we would hold up to any of the big guys, both on the vodka, the gin, and the rum front, and then even on the bourbon front. I think we've got some product aging now that's going to be top notch once it becomes of age. And we've actually grown pretty well in the past 12 months. We've been able to get distribution through Ohio, We do have distribution in some other states now too. So we did actually branch out. We have distribution in California, Michigan, also in Massachusetts, and then we just opened up distribution in Kentucky this last week. So I think we're starting to grow and hopefully be continuing to buy grains. But it's a perfect relationship. I mean, Dean grinds the grain on the farm for us. We give him kind of an outward look of what our needs are, and then probably about once every couple weeks we'll get a delivery from him. And then when we're done processing the grains, the spent mash, a portion of it does go back to the farm, goes into the animal feed program. And I think it was important for us also to kind of synchronize those two aspects to try to kind of have, or at least include, some of the organic proteins in the restaurant here too. And I think it's actually it's a little bit like making an elephant dance at times, trying to coordinate all the different components of it. But I think we finally, after about 4 or 5 months, have things figured out. And I think the patrons appreciate it too. I think it builds both to the brand story of what we're doing, and I think it was important for us to kind of approach this in a I guess an environmentally friendly way. Distilling does take a lot of energy. It does consume a lot of resources to make vodka, gin, rum, and bourbon. And I think anything you can do to offset that carbon footprint goes a long way. So.
Mm-hmm. So, when you started looking at the distillery business model, was organics looked at as, which you mentioned, you can't really make the health claims or whatever.
Yeah.
Was it partially for the marketing portion of it to be unique in kind of there's a lot of spirits available, and a lot of small distilleries.
Absolutely.
So was it somewhat to set yourself apart?
It was. I think the one thing that we looked at the marketplace, and clearly there's not. Organic is not a big thing currently today in the spirits category. There are a few industry leaders that have kind of made the plunge. Koval out of Chicago, and actually Robert is probably one of the key people that we went to classes and kind of worked on his equipment to produce some of our early products. You've got a couple people in North Carolina. I think Top of the Hill in North Carolina also has an organic distillery. And I think for us, we knew that the consumer's moving in this direction. You've seen it happen on the food space. There are very few grocery stores that you don't walk into now where you have a dedicated organic section, or at least organic somehow integrated into what the options are. We did start to see some vodkas and things like that, and interestingly enough, from the Plains area. So coming out of the Plains, where you do have a lot of grain, which is grown that's certified organic. Prairie probably being the biggest national brand that's out there.
I recognize that from looking at my shelf. That's my wife's choice until today.
Yeah, so I think Prairie was probably the first one to have a nationally distributed organic product, and I think it is tied to the grain co-op that's out at, and I think it's Montana, I believe, is where they're located too. So I think it's coming. Whiskey is very much still a category which is about age, but I think if we look at the next 7 to 10 years, it is important for us. It was important. We want to be in business 10 years from now. We want to be, I guess, relevant to the consumer, and you can definitely see where the consumer was moving in this direction. And I think craft in its own context is growing fast. And having the extra component from a marketing perspective to set you apart, but also having the sustainability story, I think, for us, as well as the actual sustainability path that we chose was also important too. I think more and more consumers do care about the impact they're having to the environment, in addition to the impact of what they put in their bodies. So,
that's one thing that I find a little bit disappointing, is how hard it is to find an organic beer.
Yeah.
There's some available, but boy, it is very limited.
I think the reality is a lot of the ingredients that go into making beer, a lot of the ingredients that go into making wine, they don't actually come from the United States, right? So they're coming from overseas. They're coming from Germany, hops and those types of things. I think you're seeing more and more people start to grow some of these ingredients here domestically, but I think it's the sourcing, basically the sourcing of the raw materials that really does kind of determine what you're able to do and what you're not able to do on the beer side. And I think that was one of the reasons we didn't kind of go into the beer path. That and the fact that there definitely are a bunch of people out there better at making beer than I was. So I don't know about there's a bunch of people better at making whiskey, but I think our focus was really to try to buy the right equipment, and even from an organic standpoint, I would say that it's a fundamental element that if you want to go down an organic path, particularly with distilled spirits, it does dictate the type of equipment that you can buy. It dictates how you set up your boiler, how you set up your chiller, how you lay out your distillery, and also how you pretty much handle all of your ingredients that are coming in. And I think the other thing too that's unique for us is that we're actually underneath the same organic certification agent as Dean. So OFA is also the same basically organic certification agent that we use. So we can actually trace the grain all the way from the distillery back to Dean's farm, where it was grown on the property, which I think in today's day and age is truly unique. So.
And as far as like you were saying, setting up your actual distilling, which is right behind us here, in setting that up differently due to organic, was that due to certification, or was that because of the actual ingredients being slightly different? And I don't know the exact process of distilling, but they work differently than actual conventional grain.
Yeah, no, I think the grains are pretty much the same. It had to do with what you could use in terms of boiler chemicals.
Okay.
And primarily, there's really two different ways to kind of distill. There's more than two, but there's two main ways that are used. One is a continuous column, where they actually take live steam from the boiler and push that up through the column, and then they strip the alcohol off. It's more energy efficient, but it does allow basically live steam from your boiler to come in contact with the product. And as a result, if you're using any kind of chelating agents or anything like that in your boiler to try to reduce fouling in the pipes and stuff, it actually ends up in a finished product. So we actually chose basically a hybrid pot still. So we have a steam bath that kind of gently heats the still after we've made the beer, and the only thing that we do is we treat the vapor. So we separate off, or if you can imagine, we heat up this copper pot, and once it gets to about 90 degrees Celsius, the ethanol will start to boil, because it boils before water, which water boils at about 100 degrees Celsius. And then when it boils, we take that steam or that vapor, that ethanol vapor, and put it through the distillation columns and start to concentrate it so that we kind of get it to whatever proof that we need it at. If we're making bourbons, we run right up near the legal limits. We're about 160 proof. When we're running vodka, we're running right about 192 proof. We do actually just a little bit above the legal limit there. And I think trying to find equipment that could do that, and produce the product we wanted, was kind of integral to the process. And truthfully, the people that do run the continuous columns, they do have a cost advantage over basically those of us that are using a pot still. But for us, we also, the organic grain does have a little bit more natural sugar, does have a little bit more flavor. And I think that what the pot still allows us to do is to better kind of capture that flavor and actually have it be represented in the finished product too. I think we didn't want to just make another vodka. Again, we wanted to make something that basically was truly unique. And we have one of our vodkas is made from corn, so it's gluten-free, non-GMO, certified organic, and then the other vodka that we have is actually made from spelled. And it's a really, really special product. I think it's unlike any other vodka that we've seen in the marketplace, and I think we are the only certified organic spelt vodka which is produced in the United States today. So,
oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard there's a lot of I don't know if I should say it, questioning of organics right now, just because of the size of operations that are getting into the business. And, like you said, at all the grocery stores, there's an organic section, whether it's in the produce aisle or it's in the canned goods section. And that means that there needs to be supply to support that. And there's larger operations that are coming in to support that, but the taste isn't always there.
Yeah.
And when you say that the sugars are higher in the grains, that's where tying it back to what Dean's doing on his farm and knowing the local farmer that's growing it and knowing that he's doing good soil practices since 30-something
30
years
years,
ago. That's where the proof is in the pudding.
Yep.
Is really where what excites me the most.
So do you have any bourbon that you're selling now?
Yeah, we do. When we first started the project, we actually went to Koval in Chicago. We have bourbon. We have certified organic bourbon right now that we're selling that was produced at Koval, leveraging organic grains. But it's sold so fast, we're almost out of inventory on that. So we have probably 100 to 150 bottles of our bourbon, our rye, and our wheat whiskey left. That we're only selling here at the distillery, and then we've started sourcing bourbon too. So we have a bourbon portfolio which is out in the market that unfortunately is not certified organic, but we really needed something to kind of bridge the gap between when the bourbon that we're making here is going to be ready, so to kind of to understand the category and kind of build the brand on the bourbon space. I mean, what we'll be doing is we'll be phasing that out with organic product as our organic product starts to become available. So,
how long do you have to age bourbon?
Depends on how good you want it to taste.
Well, I like about a 20-year if possible.
So it's a good question. There's really kind of a misconception that 20 or 25-year bourbon is going to be really good. Truthfully, because bourbon is the first thing that goes into that cask, right? So it does have to be a newly charred American oak barrel. It picks up a lot of the flavor from, picks up a lot of flavor from the charcoal. And truthfully, I would say most bourbons hit their sweet spot probably in that 10 to 12-year age range. We have products, right now we have 3 bourbon products that are in the market, 4 if you count the organic product. Our organic bourbon is running right around the 4-year mark. And then we have, pardon me, sorry, I've been talking all day, talking to store owners, trying to get more bourbon on the shelf. We have a product in the portfolio which is 8 to 10 years, and then we have a product which is a 14-year product. So we'll be phasing out the 4-year in about 3 years when the bourbon that we've been producing the last 12 months is available, and then what we'll do is just continue to phase out the other bourbons. I think that the challenge with selling old bourbon, or basically things that are in that 10 to 15-year age range, is the angel share is a lot more than most people realize. So on those 14 or 15-year barrels, we've only got 18 to 19 gallons of whiskey that's left. You put 54 gallons in the start, and not only do you have to sit on the product for close to 15 years, you've got less than half remaining when you're done, which is really why old whiskey does cost as much as it does. It's not just the fact that you're sitting on it that long, it's the fact that the angel share does actually consume over half of the barrel once you get there. So
that just blew my mind. I had heard about the angel share.
Yep.
I did not realize that it was over 50%.
Yeah, on a 15-year barrel, we'll average right around 18 or 19 gallons left versus the 54 that it originally gets filled with.
What about a 4-year age?
Yeah, 4-year, you're probably going to lose about 10 gallons, something like that. So we'll have 35, we'll still be in that 35 to 45 gallons somewhere. You actually lose about 5 gallons as soon as you fill the barrel, you lose about 5 gallons to the barrel itself. That bourbon soaks into the wood. And then on average, you lose 5 to 10% every year after that. And obviously, the older that it gets, the less liquid you have, so the losses go down, but you still have quite a bit left. And that's one of the things that makes old bourbon kind of taste the way that it does. It is the aging process, but all that flavor from the barrel starts to concentrate into that remaining liquid. So the less liquid you have, the more intense flavor that remaining liquid has. You get less alcohol impact. It does kind of smooths that bite from the alcohol, but it does you start to get a lot more of the tobacco and the leather and some of the aspects of the barrel that kind of builds into the bourbon at that point in time. So.
And bourbon does go into the barrel clear. Am I right?
Absolutely. Everything that comes off of the still is clear. It looks just like water. Yeah, it looks just like water. Doesn't drink like water, but it does look like water. So.
Well, wasn't there a company that would sell what they called the angel cut or the angel's
Devil's
share?
cut.
I think it's the devil's cut.
Yep.
I believe they're trying to recapture the liquid that's trapped in the barrel. How they do it, I don't know. I think it's probably a proprietary process.
I know how my neighbors did it because they make the Jack Daniel barrel tables and stuff.
Yep.
So their boys figured out if they take a barrel and pour some water in it and roll it around
After
for
a while.
like 2 weeks, they get
Okay.
Jack Daniels.
Okay.
Not good Jack Daniels, but
Yeah.
I mean, they
No,
thought it
but
was
I
great.
can. You definitely. I mean, like I said, you've got anywhere between 4 to 5 gallons trapped in that barrel. Probably more the older the older the whiskey is. You probably get up to maybe the 6-7 gallon mark. So.
Oh, that's really interesting to me because I just had no idea that. I thought when you'd open a barrel, you'd have your 50 gallons of.
No. Yeah, no.
Is it evaporation?
It is. Most of it's evaporation, basically, of the spirit, and depending on the humidity, you'll either lose water or you'll lose alcohol, one of the two. So, if it's super humid, you tend to lose a little bit more alcohol, and if it's really arid, you'll lose more water. They'll get kind of pulled out.
So do you age here, or do you have temperature, or is it temperature controlled here?
It is. So we have the top 3 floors of this building are basically, that's where our rick house is located. We have capacity for about 3,000 barrels of whiskey on site. So we kind of hold everything up on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors. Right now I think we've got about 75 to 100 barrels on site, and then we'll continue to add barrels as we go through. We haven't had to go to the second tier yet, so we haven't filled up the first tier on the floors. But we do each floor of the building does have actually a steam heater. So during the wintertime, we can actually bring the whole building up to temperature. To be able to kind of continue to age the whiskey during the wintertime too. So, and interestingly enough, I mean, with the organic certification, at least OFA, we worked with. It was a difficult task to even find barrels that we could use because we did actually have to trace the wood all the way back to make sure that it wasn't treated with herbicides or pesticides, because obviously the bourbon is soaking into the wood, and if it did, it would leach out any type of contaminants that are in there. So we worked with a company called Canton Cooperage that was originally located here in Canton, Ohio, but they moved to Lebanon, Kentucky back in the mid '80s when the whiskey started to boom again. And they were purchased by a French company that was actually they're following EU practices for Grand Cru wines made in France. They're following kind of those EU certification practices on being able to trace the HACCP program and everything else of the wood back to the forest to make sure that those trees haven't been treated with herbicides or pesticides or anything else. As a result, we're buying fancy barrels, we're paying more for them, but we have actually seen a difference there too. So we're actually using an air dried barrel. So it sits outside for about 4 years. The wood does, to be able to open up the pore structure. So it's kind of like a sponge. As soon as we put the whiskey in there, it does soak pretty deep into the wood. Versus a lot of barrels are maybe a 12-month air dried or even kiln dried wood. And what it does is it closes up the pore structure. So we've tried a number of different things to be able to get a premium product to market sooner. But unfortunately, it's probably going to be 3 to 4 years before the whiskey's ready. We've tried every manner of whiskey that's been produced with barrel staves and pressure aging and everything else, and there's just something that happens with Mother Nature, kind of goes through those temperature cycles, and the whiskey has a chance to kind of meet the barrel and soak into the barrel. You just can't you can't replace what happens naturally. So I think some people have done a good job of trying to replicate it or get close with some flavor aspects, but you just don't ever really find a product that has the kind of complexity and smoothness that a truly fine aged whiskey has. So.
Would have never thought of the tree aspect even. What would some of the larger distilleries, I mean, do they have their own forests where they're basically tree farms where they're spraying and?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, probably Brown-Forman, I think is one of the main distilleries that's out there that does have their own coopering program. So they, similar to a lot of the paper companies, I think they do actually own. They own hardwood forests. They actually do have their own barrel staving company, and that's kind of integrated into their brand. I would say a lot of the other ones, and I don't know the specifics on all of them, but most of them are buying barrels kind of on the open market from International Stave Company or any of the other number of barrel companies that are out there. So
I worked in forestry for 9 years, and any white oak log
Yep.
that was between 14 to 20 inches in diameter was a stave log.
Yep. Yep.
And as the bourbon popularity went up, the price on those logs went up because the bigger white oak is going to go into quarter sawn white oak for furniture, but it's that medium-sized white oak that's a stave log. So, and I helped create a lot of bourbon barrels.
But is that because you like to drink bourbon?
Well, that too, and the prices were pretty good.
Well, and I think we've kind of gone even through a shortage of the availability of the barrel stock. To be honest, too, there was a period probably about 2 or 3 years ago where the availability of aged wood just wasn't there. You couldn't. There was probably a 12 to 18 month waiting list for bourbon barrels. So luckily, we've kind of supply has kind of caught up with demand now, and I think some people have started to put wood out there, but. It's the same as aging whiskey. It just, if it takes 12 months or takes 48 months, it takes 48 months. There's just no way to, and also if Mother Nature decides to, not give you much rain or give you much snow or not get cold one winter, it's going to change how long it takes to kind of open up the pore structures on that wood too, because you are really subject to what's happening outside. And unfortunately, just like farming, you can't really control the weather.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very similar to probably some of the issues that Dean has to go through.
Definitely.
But as far as the distilling process, you kind of talked a little bit about that, but in one run, how much are you producing? How many barrels? And you said you have 75 to 100 on site here.
Yep.
And how fast in a year would that grow, or how many at a time?
Depends on how much money we have. I think on average, we can build, if we're running straight, and when you're a small craft distillery, you have to balance how much clear spirit do you make and sell versus how much whiskey can you afford to put up. The key thing is we're still selling more clear spirits right now than we are kind of putting up whiskey to try to pay the bills and keep everything going. If we had more liquid cash, we probably would be putting up somewhere between. We can put a 40 to 50 barrels up a month if we needed to, and still be able to kind of supply the demand that we have on the clear spirit side too. So. And I think that's really what it's a complicated business proposition, trying to look 5 to 10 years out. At the same time, you're trying to basically worry about paying the bills at the end of the month off of the clear spirits that you're selling. So, but yeah, right now we're on average probably every quarter we're trying to build somewhere around 20 to 25 barrels of whiskey. So. Okay.
And the clear spirits are bottled directly?
Yeah, so it takes about 10 days. So we bring the grain in from Dean. So he'll typically we'll do about we're doing like 5-6 bags at a time now. So we'll do 2,000 pound sacks, so 10 to 12,000 pounds at a time. And we're doing mostly vodka and gin, which are both produced from the corn. We are running some spelled vodka now too, but we haven't really. We're just kind of opening up more distribution on the spelled vodka. So we'll get 10 to 12,000 pounds of grain, anywhere between 4 to 6 sacks of grain, and then we'll go ahead behind you. You've got a big stainless steel tank, which is our mash tank. That can hold about 2 bags of grain, so about 4,000 pounds. So if we're making vodka, we'll fill that with about 4,000 liters of water, about 1,000 gallons of water, and then we'll drop the 4,000 pounds of grain into that and kind of start the mashing process. When you mash in, you basically you take water, which is around 160 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 85 degrees Celsius, and you go ahead and slowly kind of incorporate that grain in there to get those starches to come out and get the sugars to start to go into solution. And then what we do is we use 2 different types of enzyme. We use an alpha amylase enzyme, and then we also use a beta glucanase enzyme to help kind of convert those carbohydrates that you have in the grain over to sugars. You really need to kind of go through that process in order to get to a feedstock for the yeast, because the yeast they can't process carbohydrates. They can only process sugars. So it takes about a day or day and a half for us to kind of go through that full mashing process, and then we'll cool things down to about 30 degrees C, and we'll pitch our yeast. We usually let the yeast sit in the mash tank for about 24 hours just to kind of wake up, get active, and then we can actually fill up 2 fermentation tanks with 1 mash tank. So it's a 6,000 liter mash tank, and then we have a 3,000 liter fermentation tanks. We'll go ahead and transfer everything over to the fermentation tanks. It'll sit there. And we just really kind of control the temperature, try to keep it relatively low. Make sure the yeast are happy. Don't want to stress them out. When they get stressed out, they start making bad tasting booze. So we keep it just like a teenager. You got to keep them happy and keep them fed and everything else, and hopefully the household is peaceful and quiet. So we, about 10 days later, we'll have about a 14% alcohol mash, and then we put that mash into the pot still. And we do. We've actually gone to. We started off doing a direct distillation of each batch, trying to go directly from that 14% over to 192%. But what we've kind of found lately is that we'll take all 6 of those tanks and we'll do what's called a stripping run. So we'll just put it through the still really quick, just to separate the alcohol back from the mash, and then go ahead and get rid of the mash. And then we'll put roughly we'll put 2 batches of 3,000 liters of 80 proof spirit back in the pot still, and then we'll do 2 final distillation runs where we kind of run that off. 1 mash tank for us is going to produce about 1,700 bottles to 1,800 bottles of vodka. So it's a pretty decent yield. We'll get about 2.5 to 3 pallets out of a mash. So. It all depends on whether or not Dean hits his grind down the grain. So if he gets his grind right on the grain, then we're good to go.
A fine grind is good to find.
So the grind has a lot to do with it?
Grind. We've seen probably a 15 to 20% difference in yield just based on how fine you can get the grind, because you really need to get those carbohydrates. You need to get everything into full solution and get it out.
So you want it like flour?
Yeah, it's flour. It's pretty much a flour that we're using to make our mash. So, where beer is typically a cracked grain, we're using almost a pulverized flour to go ahead and run everything off.
Like the spelt versus the rye versus the corn, they all work the same?
Pretty much the same. We use the same equipment. The only difference we've seen, corn definitely has the best yield. I mean, it's got the highest amount of initial sugar. And it really is. It's an easy grain to handle and to process. The other 2, whether it be the wheat or whether it be the spelt, they get a little foamy or frothy when those yeast start to take hold. So it does take a little bit of time. We have to actually cool those down a little bit more than normal in the early stages of the fermentation. Otherwise, the tanks tend to foam over. But other than that, it's pretty much that same 10 to 12 days. We might have to add a couple of extra days, just because we're cooling the temperature down so much to begin with, just to keep it from getting out of control.
Did you learn the foaming over from experience?
Of course we did. You come in and all of a sudden the whole distillery floor looks like you got about 4 inches of cake batter on it.
So at the farm, Dean, as far as actually grinding that grain down, do you have do you have a hammer mill, or what are you using?
We've used a hammer mill, and we've adopted it so that we can make it finer by modifying the hammers and this hole size and adding horsepower to just really run it hard and tight to squeeze every bit out of it that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And like grinding flour is, it changes each time with the humidity of the day you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? That has a lot to do with the fineness of it, is the humidity and the weather?
Yes. If it's too humid, it doesn't want to squeeze or break down as easily as when it's drier.
When it's dry, it shatters easier,
right?
Basically. Interesting.
So can you grind ahead, or is that putting product at risk at that point?
It would put product at risk. We like to grind it fresh and so that it's most alive and available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you would grind and deliver hopefully the same day that you're making it?
Same week, typically the same week, yeah. And then we might have grain on the floor for maybe 7 to 10 days at the most, but we usually process everything within a 2-week time frame. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So are you looking at expanding into different spirits as the business grows, as you grow and you're keeping ahead of demand?
Yep.
Are you looking at branching into different gins or vodkas with different grains or anything like that?
We are. So we've, from the beginning, we really recognize that spelt is an amazing grain. It really has a flavor, has a texture, you can turn spelt into a distillate, which is truly unique. So for us, and we continue to see whenever we do tastings, people reacting to it in a very positive fashion. I wish it cost 35 cents a pound like the corn did, but we recognize that it's a very different crop to grow than corn. We actually currently have a premium vodka which is built off of that spelt. And we're looking to possibly extend and do a couple different infusions to broaden the spelt base. I think we're going to stay with just the corn. We turn that into a bottle of vodka that we sell for under $20. It's affordable. It's easy to process. We can do it. We can call Dean, and he's got plenty of corn on hand to be able to satisfy our needs, and it grows well in the local soil. So that one we use primarily for bars and restaurants, and also for consumers that consume more vodka than others. So, and they're looking for something that's in that Tito's price point range. And for us, it's a local organic non-GMO option to Tito's for people and it typically saves them about $1.10 versus Tito's too. Now the spelt, we currently just have the vodka, whereas on the corn we have a vodka and a gin. We are going to be launching a gin, probably a summer gin, and then also a winter gin next year underneath the spelt product. We've actually been working now for about 8 to 10 months on the botanical blends there, and I think we're where we want to be on that. So we're going to be starting the packaging development work and everything else over the next month or so. And then I think we're going to try to continue to build off of that spelt product, because it's definitely it's a higher priced product. It's the bottle of vodka that we make sells for close to $30, the same as Grey Goose or any of the other premium products that are out there. But we're finding that over time the repeat purchases on that, it's actually outselling the corn vodka, where we're not where we don't have necessarily bars and restaurants that are using it. So if consumers are kind of looking at a $20 option versus that $30 option, and we do a tasting and they get to taste the spelt, they're willing to come back and pay the price premium for the spelt. So I think it's really, for us, it's just going to be kind of continuing to build that out. We're in about 90 to 100 stores right now on the spelt. I think we're looking to push that up to 200, which is roughly the number that we're in on the corn too. So I think we'll be trying to double at least the distribution this year going into next year, and really kind of be ready for the summer season next year with that spelt vodka and distribution, at least through all of Ohio. Mm-hmm. And then we've also got some distribution out in California now too on it.
So are you doing the distribution and sales kind of or you've got a staff of people that are, or are you?
We're a small company, so we run the whole distillery operation with 5 of us. So there's myself and my wife, and then we have two guys that work on the production side, and then we have one person who's our drinksmith, who works with us, doing cocktail development and things like that for bars and restaurants, and he also works here at the distillery bar. So we really just have the 5 employees. So yeah, I mean, we're typically myself and my wife will go out and do talk to retailers and things like that, and we are also opening up distribution in other states now too. And then like on the weekends, the guys will kind of typically handle things here at the distillery. We'll be out either doing tastings or starting to do stuff, and we've actually we started doing all the tastings ourselves, but obviously there's only so many places that 3 people can be at any point in time. So we've actually brought on an agency now that we've spent some time trying to train train the team on really what are the products, what differentiates us from some of the others. And then they've actually been handling the tastings for us, both in Columbus and Cleveland markets. And we're just actually going live in the Cincinnati market next weekend. It'll be the first time that we do that. My wife and I were down at Trader Joe's this weekend. Not Trader Joe's, sorry. Jungle Jim's down in Cincinnati this weekend. We had a really nice tasting down there, and actually had really good reaction to all the products. I think we'll continue to build on that. There's 2 Trader Joe's down there that do quite a bit of volume. So
obviously you were looking for a nice little part-time job after 25 years in the corporate industry, huh?
It's fun. I mean, I think that what I was looking for is to have, I think, a little bit more control over our own destiny and be able to make decisions that were probably were a little bit more based on long-term benefit than short-term economic gain. So
that's really cool. One thing I did want to ask Dean on I know spelt can be a real good cover crop as far as in the rotation, or as part of a rotation, as far as diversifying the rotation. What kind of challenges have you seen growing that, and what is there anything holding you back from being able to keep up if they're looking to grow or anything along those lines?
Oh, the American farmer, we can outproduce in a hurry. It is a tricky grain. It likes dry feet. It likes good fertility. Wet summers can wreak havoc on its maturing and ripening, but it does have a natural husk built into it so that it can weather more pests and diseases than other grains like wheat or rye or oats. So it's pretty resilient. It's well adapted to our area. I've been growing it a long time, and it does not yield as well as your conventional wheats because it has this thick husk and it has this extra process that has to go through to have it removed. So you end up losing nearly 50% of your weight to this protective husk coating. But that's part of what makes it so great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and you sell spelt by the pound versus your wheats or by the bushel. Is that right?
Correct.
Because you're losing half of it when you dehull it.
And because the standardization of what a bushel of spelt weighs is not as clear as it is for the other conventionally grown crops.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other spelt vodkas or spelt spirits on the market at all?
There's one out of Connecticut, but it's actually coming out of Poland. So the product is distilled and produced in Poland, and then it's imported into the U.S. It's called the V vodka. But to our knowledge, that's the only vodka that's out there. We were first introduced by spelt by the team at Koval in Chicago, where they actually at one point in time had a whiskey that was made from spelt. And one of the classes that we were there, we tasted about 75 or 80 different distillates from a variety of different grains over basically the course of a full day. And the one thing that stood out to me was just the spelt was just had an amazing. It has an amazing kind of presence on the palate. Both when you drink it, it's almost like a creamy distillate, and then the flavor was so delicate and floral that it was really one of those things that we just said, okay, this is truly a special product. We started talking to Koval, and they said, yeah, it really makes a great tasting product, but nobody knows what it is, and we can't sell it. So I think they've since moved away from it as they've grown. But it really is a great product, and I think for us, we're not trying to be the biggest distillery in the country or anything like that. So I think we really wanted to have a product which was unique on the marketplace that we could kind of build off, and also that kind of helped out the local farming community. And like Dean said, the spelt grows really well in the conditions we have here in Ohio. So as long as we don't get too wet of a summer.
So as far as, I guess, a question for both of you would be, there's a lot of different varieties of wheat. There's a lot of different varieties and availability of different small grains. I'm thinking like triticale, stuff like that. Have you looked into, and would it work into what Dean is doing on the farm, and to what, like, as far as flavor profile and continuing to look for a niche product using different types of small grains to distill, or is that just kind of way down the road?
No, I think it's definitely out there. If we were going to do something, it would probably fall more into the whiskey portfolio, looking to kind of make some unique grains. We've had some, again, kind of going back to the folks at Koval. They make an oat whiskey, which is absolutely astounding. And I think also we've toyed around a little bit with different varieties of hard red winter wheat. We've kind of stayed away from soft red winter wheat here. It definitely grows well in Ohio. But I think you've got Watershed and you've got OYO that are both in the Columbus area that are kind of have products on the market that are made from soft red winter wheat. And we kind of said okay, that's kind of their territory. They've already got a stake in the ground. One of them has a vodka, which is made from the soft red winter wheat, and I do like the characteristics of it. I think it does make a great tasting product, and it definitely has much better yield than the hard red winter wheat that we're using because it's got a higher carbohydrate content. But I think for us on the whiskeys, we landed with hard red winter wheat primarily for the flavor benefit. We needed something that was a little bit more hardy that could kind of hold up to the barrel better than the soft red winter wheat. And I think we'll continue to play around with, we've talked a little bit about blue corn, maybe making a bourbon from blue corn or some of the heirloom corns that are out there. I think you've had some open pollination corns you've got your hands on. So yeah. I think we'll probably continue to play around with some of those projects. But I think in the first 12 months for us, it was really how do you get distribution? How do you kind of get those products out there and start paying back the bank because they tend to want to get paid every month too. So
they don't really care if you're selling or not.
They don't care.
Kind of
yeah, they're pretty impatient when it comes to paying back the debt. So
now you do make a rye whiskey.
We do. We actually and it's interesting because. I love bourbon. I don't want to say that I don't like bourbon. We'll have a lot of people will come in and do the tasting where they'll taste the wheat whiskey, which is 100% hard red winter wheat. They'll taste the rye, which is 51% rye grain, and then the 49% hard red winter wheat. And they'll fall in love with the rye or fall in love with the wheat, and then they'll still buy the bourbon, even though just because bourbon is bourbon. But yeah, no, we have a rye whiskey which is truly unique. We've got a number of bars and restaurants that have kind of picked it up as a product, and I think we went a little bit different direction than most of the rye whiskeys that are out there because. A lot of the rye whiskeys are 95 or 100% rye. We wanted to do something that was, a little bit softer, a little bit more approachable. So, and actually something my wife would drink too. So that was one of my goals in this was to make sure that she would drink everything in the portfolio too. So
that's one thing I really like rye whiskey, but some rye whiskeys the rye is too sharp.
Yeah.
Because, growing up we raised rye, and you take a handful of rye and you put it in your mouth. It has a very unique flavor, and you taste that. In some rye whiskeys are just too overwhelmingly
too
rye,
peppery, too spicy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and I think when you finish it with that hard red winter wheat, it's interesting. You get the sweetness from the wheat probably first, and then you get that spicy, savory component from the rye comes on the finish. It's a great sipper. It's actually probably. Going into last winter was probably one of my favorite products because we really just started dumping our barrels of whiskey around Christmas time last year, and I probably would tend to favor the rye over the other two. The soft red winter wheat, the hard red winter wheat makes a beautiful whiskey, super soft, very luscious, but it's almost too smooth at sometimes. So you do want something that had a little bit more bite to it. So.
I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get a whole pallet of this stuff in my van. So Dean, how is it as the farmer to be able to go into a liquor store and know that there's liquor or there's spirits in a liquor store from your farm?
There's a tremendous amount of pride there. Mm-hmm. And it suddenly tastes a whole lot better knowing where it came from, knowing that it's organically grown and from a local source. You start to take notice of those subtle flavors whenever you're intricately involved in the production of it and know what's gone into it to make the differences. It's not something that most people necessarily do instinctively. And it's been a great educational process for me. But and people that I share it with are also very happy to learn about it and expand their palate as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just so neat for me to sit here and get the whole story from the farmer to the distiller. It's going to make me look for it, and because I checked, it is sold locally where I am. But I just think that story of the connection of Ohio, I think it's a really cool I don't know. I've always been intrigued. I made a
Yep.
I made a little still out of a old milker bucket. It was not a success. I figured out I'll just buy it.
It's probably safer that way too. So.
Yes.
If you ever want to play around, you can come in. We'll put you to work. It's not a problem. We can show you how to make booze.
I would love sometime to come up and watch the process sometime.
It's even more fun just to come and smell the process.
Oh,
The aromatherapy is intoxicating itself.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. 192 proof vodka coming off the still. It's actually, we strip off all the head, so we get the acetone and methanol. We get all the bad stuff out. It's actually super sweet. So it comes off the still. You put your finger underneath of it, taste it, and it actually does taste good. I mean, it tastes good coming out without even being filtered or anything else. Now, we go through some filtration process before we finish it off, but no.
so Dean, I want to thank you so much for being on here as the farmer to this wonderful distillery. And Kevin, where can people find give me the name and the website and stuff for your distillery, your restaurant here.
Yep.
It's an absolutely beautiful place.
Thank you.
We're definitely planning to eat after we're done here.
Right.
So
Well, hopefully we'll taste some whiskey too before you guys take off.
Perfect.
Okay.
So Western Reserve Distillers is the name of the company. It's www.westernreservedistillers.com. If you go to our website, you can see kind of the list of products that we currently have out in the marketplace. There's also, if you want to know where to find us, there's a Where to Find Us tab that's on the website. And what we've done is we've broken down all of the liquor stores, at least in Ohio, by county. So that seemed to be the most efficient way. I would say that our vodkas, the vodka, the gin, that are made from corn, we're in about 200 locations across the state, so we're very well distributed. The bourbons, both the 14-year and the 8-year, are relatively well distributed too. So we've got, distribution: Youngstown, Dayton, Toledo, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. And then I think we're looking to add and try to kind of get all 5 to 6 products, hopefully at every liquor store in the state. We rely really on being able to do store tastings to help build the brand. I mean, it's a cluttered space, and the big guys definitely have been driving the bus for a long time. So for us to try to get access to the consumer, Ohio does allow us to go into the stores and taste. So we tend to focus more on the Krogers and the Giant Eagles that have, and Acme's and Bueller's that have the tasting licenses, because it does allow us to go in and, on a Friday or a Saturday to kind of go into the liquor store, set up, and then be able to taste products with consumers. So that's really where most of our footprint has been, has been in the liquor stores there. We are in a number of the independent liquor stores, but I think as we start to build the volume in the bigger stores, that will allow us to go to some of the more independent stores. In the state of Ohio, you have to maintain a certain sales per store. If you don't maintain the sales per store, they basically remove you from distribution for up to 12 months. So if you have any of your products fall below their minimum thresholds, whether you're a local company or whether you're a big company, you do have to come out of, they'll take you out of distribution, and then you can't come back in for 12 months. So we're a little bit careful in terms of how many stores we add to make sure that we can support the stores and that the products fit in the stores, and also we rely very much on the people in the store to help educate consumers too. So, and I think the tastings allow us to do that. We can talk to the store staff; they get a chance to meet us and talk to us. And I think Farmer Dean's been instrumental in that too, out in the Ashland area. I think they probably know you pretty well by now. So
Yes, we try to frequent all of the agencies.
but yeah, no, I think it's so that's really for the most part where you can find us today. And then obviously you can come to the distillery here. We do sell products here, primarily on Fridays and Saturdays. The gift shop and everything else is open, but when we're here during the week making booze or dumping barrels, you're welcome to come to the distillery, knock on the door. We're always happy to sell you a bottle from the property here too. So, and then the restaurant that's attached to the distillery is called Distill Table. Pretty much all local, local produce, a real local focus on everything. And obviously the proteins, pretty much all of the beef and pork that we serve on the menu now is coming back from Dean's farm. So it's been a great relationship. And I think it's been what 2.5 years in the making to kind of get to this point from the time we first started talking to now. And I think we look forward to I think the relationship as it gets stronger as we go forward, actually. So
The proof is in the sampling.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
And Brian.
opportunity. So
Thanks for listening to another episode of Back to the Roots podcast, brought to you by Albert Lee C.